Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to preview week 3 of the fantasy football season for you. We're going to keep putting out our waiver wire show every week, this weekly preview show, our DFS shows throughout the season. If you want to stay on top of all of it and anything else we might put out in between, you want to hit the subscribe button below this video on YouTube, or you can subscribe via your favorite pod listening channel. I turn all of these into audio pods after we do them as well. So subscribe, stick with us. We love having you. We appreciate you. Jared, let's start looking at week 3. And a big story became Cam Akers getting traded yesterday. He's now a Viking. That not only gives him a chance at new life, it also potentially challenges Alexander Mattison's spot. It was Akers and a 7th round pick in 2026 for a 6th round pick in 2026. It's certainly not Minnesota saying, oh, we got to get Cam Akers.
Yeah, I always laugh when dynasty owners are trading draft picks 3 years away. That's what we saw. I've never seen picks that far in the future traded. So yeah, I mean, the Vikings acquired Akers for nothing, which was not a surprise because he had no future with the Rams. So I don't know. It's going to be a battle here of running backs that have just been inefficient this season. Inefficient, at times throughout their career, most of their careers. I think the Vikings really wanted Alex Mattison to be their guy, but he hasn't been good through 2 weeks. And when you can get someone like Cam Akers for as cheap as they did, and Akers has, flashed at times. We talked about it, throughout the summer that he's had stretches where he's been pretty good. And of course, Akers has some history with Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell and offensive coordinator Wes Phillips from their time together in LA. So Akers should get up to speed in this offense pretty quickly.
No matter how much you believe in the guy or guys that you already have, it always makes sense in fantasy and in real football to get extra shots, to have multiple guys so that either one of them works out or you have a fill-in if somebody gets hurt. We just saw Nick Chubb go down on Monday night. So whatever exactly they feel about Cam Akers, it just makes sense to bring somebody in for basically nothing. Like you said, a running back that the coaches are familiar with. Anything can really happen from here. We don't know. So you can certainly project it however you want, and you might wind up right. The things that we know here, nobody on the current Vikings running back depth chart has proved himself to be good over a meaningful stretch of NFL games yet. Doesn't mean they're not. It just means we haven't seen any of them prove that they are good running backs yet, real life or fantasy production wise. We know that the Vikings gave very little to get Cam Akers. They're taking a low-level bet. That does not tell us anything about what they hope he can become, what they think he can become, or what they want him to be. We do have the Vikings facing the Chargers this week. So what's the immediate reaction here? Are you moving Alexander Mattison down for week 3 at all? Obviously, we'll keep an eye out for any indication from Vikings coaches about what the plan is in the backfield.
Right. Again, I think because Akers has familiarity with the offense, that there's a good chance he's active on Sunday. I don't think he'll play a big role. I did nudge Mattison down the rankings a tad. I took like 1 carry away from him. I still like Mattison as a play this week because of this matchup and because he's just simply he's dominated backfield work so far. So even if he loses a little bit, we're still talking about a guy that's going to get 75% of the backfield work. And this is just a game we want guys in, right? It has a 54-point over under this Vikings Chargers game. So I would still feel comfortable starting Mattison as a running back 2 this week. I mean, by the time we get to, week 4, that might not be the case. But as far as this week goes, I still like Mattison. I think Cam Akers, you're not starting him this week. But I think if Cam Akers was dropped in your league, he should be owned in all 12-team leagues and most 10-team leagues. This was about as good of an outcome as Akers could have hoped for from a fantasy perspective, right? He goes to a backfield with an unproven starter in a strong offense. Now, the last point I'll make about the whole situation is, the Vikings are second in pass rate over expected through 2 weeks, which is what they were last year. This is a pass heavy offense. And part of that's because the running game's been so bad. But even if the running game improves, I think, Kevin O'Connell wants this to be a pass first offense, which it should be when you have Justin Jefferson and TJ Hockenson and Jordan Addison. So, that's not great news for the running backs. The other thing is Minnesota's offensive line has been bad through 2 weeks. They're 27th in adjusted line yards. They're 21st in Pro Football Focus run blocking grade. So, that's led to some of the inefficiency for Alex Mattison. And it's going to be a problem for whoever's getting carries in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's a positive situation in that it's an upside offense that should score plenty of points. That means touchdown chances. It's not an upside situation in that the blocking isn't very good. You said they're pass leaning. They were pass leaning with Dalvin Cook last year. I don't think that's a huge impact because I don't think that we really get a backfield split here, but maybe we do end up getting that. That's certainly within the range of possible outcomes. I think as long as you don't consider either of these guys worthless or high upside options, then anything in between that is okay for how you treat them. I agree that Mattison is an RB2 this week. I am not as comfortable with him in that role as Jared is. I've been trying to argue Mattison down our week 3 rankings a little bit. So you can check the week 3 rankings on draftsharks.com. See who ends up winning out as we get closer to the Sunday kickoffs on that one. Speaking of winning out, we now go to the Cleveland backfield with Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt coming back. And I know that people are going to immediately wonder whether Kareem Hunt re-signing with the team makes Jerome Ford, I don't know, less valuable, shakier, whatever. Here's what we have gotten so far. Kevin Stefanski called Jerome Ford the featured back the day after Nick Chubb went down. That was before they brought in Kareem Hunt, but it was probably while they were courting him, and they had probably already talked to him some. It's also worth noting that Kareem Hunt's initial run with the Browns finished in a rocky way. He wanted to be traded last year. He didn't get it. They did not re-sign him after the season. They could have re-signed him at any point. He was a free agent all offseason, but Cleveland instead moved on to Jerome Ford as the clear number 2 running back. Even while Ford was missing basically all of August with a hamstring injury, they didn't bring anybody else in besides Pierre Strong. And we saw Monday night that Pierre Strong, not a significant piece of that. And we've seen since then with Kareem Hunt coming in. So they like Jerome Ford. I still am leaning toward Jerome Ford being the clear leader in this backfield. Kareem Hunt is a bit more insurance. I'm sure he gets more than what Pierre Strong would have gotten, but he's not really changing my Jerome Ford outlook. What about you, Jared?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think Kareem Hunt is insurance. So I think that means to start, Jerome Ford's going to get his chance to be the guy here. And then if he stumbles, if he's ineffective, then Hunt, could get in there. Because, I mean, listen, I'm excited about Ford. I think, he's an explosive player. We saw that on Monday night. But he's also a 5th-round pick with 42 career touches. So we kind of still don't know what Jerome Ford is. Kareem Hunt, I mean, he was inarguably just not good last year for the Browns. 48 running backs had 90-plus carries last season. Hunt ranked 41st among those 48 in yards per carry. He was 35th in rush yards over expected per attempt, 44th in Pro Football Focus rushing grade. I'm just, generally not going to bet on a 28-year-old running back bouncing back from, that type of season. So I think there's still a good chance that Ford is just better than Kareem Hunt at this point. So Ford is still definitely the guy you'd rather have. He's the guy to play this week. But again, like Cam Akers, I think in most leagues, Kareem Hunt is worth stashing just because we all know how shaky running back is at this point with all the injuries we've already dealt with and all the ineffective backfields around the NFL. So stash Hunt, but I still think Ford is the better bet for fantasy value going forward.
I agree. As long as you don't go out of your way to get Kareem Hunt, don't spend too much. Don't drop somebody that's actually useful. Because like you said, he was not a very good player last year and there was no explanation for it. It wasn't like he was coming off an injury or dealing with an injury. It was just an aging running back getting way less efficient than he had been. Next up is Kyren Williams, who has been one of the stories. Like if we didn't have Puka Nacua, then Kyren Williams might be the biggest fantasy story right now. So obviously, we're starting him at this point. You have to rank Kyren Williams high this week, especially relative to where he started the year. He's had 2 very good weeks, dominating work. They're at Cincinnati, which is nothing scary matchup-wise. He's tied for the running back lead in targets right now with Jaylen Warren, by the way, who we're going to get to in a minute. What about beyond that? The near future and even full season for Kyren Williams. Are you just like sticking with him and saying, sweet, it's been tough to find somebody I can count on this guy? Or is he like, I got to sell it before the dream ends?
Yeah, this is one where I think theoretically he should probably be a sell high just because he scored a bunch of touchdowns and just he's 194 pounds. I don't believe he's gonna either stay in this type of role or hold up in this type of role for the entire season. So if you have 3 other top 20 backs you trust, then maybe you consider, seeing if you can get, a huge return for Kyren Williams. But I think a lot of teams, I think you just ride this train for as long as you can. Like you said, he's 10th in our week 3 running back rankings. He's, not far off from being, 8th among running backs. So he's a must start this week. He's a strong start this week. I think for most teams, you just use Kyren Williams and hope his body holds up under this type of workload.
If somebody offers you Josh Jacobs right now for Kyren Williams, what are you doing?
I would accept because Jacobs has just as good a role if you look at the underlying stuff as Kyren Williams does, and we've just seen him do it. He has the body to hold up under that type of work. So I would make that trade.
Yeah, it's one of those that it's impossible to feel comfortable doing it right now because we've seen 2 bad weeks from Josh Jacobs and 2, amazing weeks from Kyren Williams. But we do still have to realize this is a third-day pick who didn't really play a whole lot last year in a bad backfield versus a guy that was fantasy's best running back last year. So might be one that doesn't end up working out for you, but I think that's a good chance to take. Relatively speaking. We did put out our weekly trade targets article yesterday, Wednesday on draftsharks.com. It's coming out every week on Wednesday throughout the season. It's including an impressive chart that only our guy Alex can do. You might know him as Peaked in High School, either from Reddit or X. So be sure to check that out if you're looking to trade this week, whether you're looking to buy somebody, sell somebody, or trying to figure out whether you should hold that player that's a question mark for you at the moment. And, when you find that player that you're targeting, either buying, selling, whatever, hit the trade navigator on draftsharks.com to help you find the optimal trading partner inside your league and to build the trade package to make that deal happen. We're ready to help on both cases. Moving on to the Steelers backfield, we've got Najee Harris, we've got Jaylen Warren, and Tuesday, Jared, we had Mike Tomlin after the Monday night game saying that Jaylen Warren has earned more touches and that the team is likely to start giving them to him. What are you doing with that backfield?
Yeah, I don't think you can do much with Najee Harris. I just don't think you're going to get anything for him in return for a trade. And I also don't think the Steelers are going to go give Jaylen Warren 70% of this backfield work. So even this week, Najee Harris is still sitting in RB3 flex territory, partly because the position's so weak already. So there's still some use for him, even if you're not going to get a return on your 4th round investment. Jaylen Warren, maybe there's still an opportunity to go out and trade for him. I think that the big play he broke off in prime time on Monday night probably doesn't help that. But I would not be surprised if Jaylen Warren outscores Najee Harris the rest of the way, just because he is the more explosive player. He is doing more in the passing game. So if they're splitting work 50-50 down the middle, Warren might end up being the better fantasy play. So at this point, they're close in our rest of season rankings. They're close in our week 3 rankings. I think you kind of consider both guys like RB3s at this point, and we'll see where the backfield goes from here.
I think Jaylen Warren's kind of like the PPR version of Tyler Algier, where he's not going to get enough touches to get you there every week, but he's on a team that needs him because they don't have a whole lot of guys set to make plays, especially while Deontay Johnson's out. It looks like Jaylen Warren's the better passing game bet than Najee Harris, so that'll help, especially with a team that looks poised to trail in plenty of games. So I would rather have Jaylen Warren than any of the Bears running backs right now because I think there's a better chance of him giving us worthwhile stuff. The Bears look like a committee that's going to trail in games and still has their best running back at quarterback. I agree that it's going to be tough to actually acquire Jaylen Warren right now because I think you'd probably have to give more than you would really like to for a guy that's not a clear starter. If you do have Jaylen Warren, though, they've got Vegas this week. They've got Houston next week. We might also be able to get some fantasy production out of Najee Harris in those 2 games. This team started out with San Francisco and Cleveland in the first 2 games. They very well might finish the season as 2 of the best defenses in the league. So we might have a slightly skewed view of what this Pittsburgh offense is going to be going forward. Maybe it's more useful. It pretty much has to be more useful than it was over the first 2 weeks. We'll see just how useful over these next 2. I would say I don't like Najee Harris going forward. I would love to get rid of him if you can for anything, both in redraft and in dynasty. And if you do have either of these guys and a not great running back situation, I think there's a chance that you can just go ahead and start either one and have it help mildly over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was probably too high on the Steelers offense this summer, but I do think it's going to be not as bad as it's looked these first 2 weeks. Again, I think, like you said, I think Cleveland and San Francisco are both, top 10 defenses, maybe even top 5. I know Cleveland is second in defensive DVOA through 2 weeks. So it's been 2 tough matchups for the Steelers to start. One thing I'll say about, for both these guys, similar to the Minnesota situation, Pittsburgh's O-line has been horrible. They're 31st in adjusted line yards, and they're 30th in PFF run blocking grade. So that's part of the reason Najee Harris has been inefficient again this season. Warren, again, has that ability to break off bigger plays, which is, I think, important when you're going to, have a lot of runs that are going to be going for, 1-0 negative yards because this offensive line just isn't very good.
And of course, if either of these guys goes down, the other one is going to get a big
Yeah.
boost because it's not a situation where some other running back is going to step up and split. It's going to be
Yep.
a backfield domination for either guy if the other
Yep.
one goes down. So certainly holding on to either of them. Next up, Jared, same division. Jamar Chase is an interesting case right now, and it's more so because of his quarterback. They've been bad on offense the first 2 weeks, and Joe Burrow has now tweaked his calf injury. So it brings up for me, not just for this week, we'll get to that in a minute, but Jamar Chase, I think it's a time to figure out whether he's somebody to go out and actively try to buy, or if it's a situation to, I don't know, just kind of watch how it plays out because we're nervous about jumping in on it. Are you trying to buy Jamar Chase right now?
I think, as always with questions like this, it depends. If I'm sitting at 2-0 and just liking the makeup of my team and thinking I can maybe survive even if Jamar Chase isn't Jamar Chase for the next month, because I do think that might be the case. I think there's a chance they just sit Burrow now for a week or 2 or 3. I don't know, however long it might be to get him back to 100%, or that he continues to try to play through this and just isn't Joe Burrow. So I think but I think over the second half of the season, because I think this calf will eventually be behind Burrow. Fingers crossed if he doesn't aggravate it again or whatever. So I think over the second half of the season, like Jamar Chase could still be that top 3 fantasy wide receiver. So again, if you're in a good spot, if you can afford to struggle with Chase for a few weeks, I think I would go out and make a deal for him right now.
Yeah, so I got some sample deals because people have been talking about him and wondering about him on our Discord. Asked our followers on X about it as well. So here's one proposal from Discord. Give up Zach Moss, Kyren Williams, Garrett Wilson, and get in return Jamar Chase, Alexander Mattison, Dalvin Cook. Probably a proposal that was put out before Cam Akers was acquired, but it was at least the same day. So what do you think, Jared? Would you give Zach Moss, Kyren Williams, Garrett Wilson to get Jamar Chase, Mattison, and Dalvin Cook?
I think it's close. I'd have to see. I'd have to see if this guy could survive without Kyren Williams at running back. That's kind of the sticking point for me. I'm not worried about trading Zach Moss. I'm still expecting JT to be back with the Colts. If not, trading Moss could hurt you. And I'm not too worried about giving up Garrett Wilson. But if you can survive without Kyren for a little bit, I would do that deal for Chase.
3 weeks in, we have to decide whether you can get along without Kyren Williams. I agree. Yeah. I think it's a fine shot to take on Jamar Chase, but you have to be okay at running back because neither Mattison or Dalvin Cook is really helping you out. Yep. From our X followers, we got a 12-team Superflex PPR league. I assume it's redraft. This team gave Drake London, Cortland Sutton, and Jordan Love to get Jamar Chase in return. That's a deal I'm making.
Yep, I like that one for sure, assuming you have a second quarterback to make up for the loss of Love.
Another one got Jamar Chase for Drake London and Sky Moore. That's another one I'm easily making in whatever format.
Yes, for sure.
And then on the dynasty front, we've got sending Ramondre Stevenson and Drake London to get Jamar Chase. To me, that's also an easy accept. Obviously, London's more attractive in dynasty than in redraft, but it's still Jamar Chase. That's a top 2 or 3 asset.
Basically, any dynasty trade with Jamar Chase on the one side, I'm gonna go with Jamar Chase.
Well, let's end with one that's Jamar Chase for Brandon Ayuk and Jonathan Taylor in dynasty.
I'm still going Chase there.
Yes, very easily for me as well. So it's a good time to try to buy Jamar Chase. You got to know that you're probably going to have to be patient. But Jared, that brings up this week's situation. We don't know yet whether Joe Burrow is going to play on Monday night against the Rams. Let's hope that we know before we set our Sunday lineups. But I think even more so than for the quarterback, it matters for the receivers. How do you think our rankings will change for Chase, for T. Higgins, if we get Jake Browning as the starting QB for the Bengals?
So I think how we treated Garrett Wilson last week and how we're going to treat him going forward is kind of how we would be treating Jamar Chase and T. Higgins if it's Jake Browning under center. I mean, it's just super talented wide receivers with what's very likely going to be bad quarterback play. Jake Browning went undrafted out of Washington back in 2019. So he's been, bouncing around the NFL for 5 years now. His first regular season pass attempt came in week 1. He threw one pass in the opener. And I looked at his numbers this preseason, 6.2 yards per attempt, 2 interceptions to 1 touchdown, 48th out of 68 quarterbacks in PFF passing grade. So, as you expect, Jake Browning is not very good, and it'd be a major problem for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins if he starts on Monday night.
Yeah, we really don't know what Jake Browning is going to do. Like you mentioned, he's been in the league since 2019, spent 2 years on the Vikings practice squad, spent 2 years on the Bengals practice squad, and then this offseason beat Trevor Siemian for the backup job this summer. Now, it's worth noting that the Bengals did not look to upgrade on that even while Joe Burrow was missing August with that calf injury. So that tells us that the team is comfy with Jake Browning as the fill-in quarterback. He was a 4-year starter at Washington. He had a monster sophomore season that made it seem like he was heading for a decent draft slot. Just okay otherwise, though, and went undrafted. So we have to assume not a whole lot, but, we'll see. The Bengals at least believe in him as their backup. So that says, don't forget about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in your week 3 lineups, I would say.
Exactly. And, we haven't been saying to definitely bench Garrett Wilson with the quarterback downgrade, but, I think Chase and Higgins would both land in, wide receiver 2, fringe wide receiver 3 territory, or somewhere in that type of range if it is Browning.
Yeah, they become like Michael Pittman.
Yep, exactly.
So we're not saying definitely bench Garrett Wilson, but we are probably saying sell him whenever you can, right? We've got wide receiver 21 in PPR right now, tied for 35th among wideouts and targets, wide receiver 39 in expected PPR points. Basically, Garrett Wilson has made himself seem helpful in fantasy with 2 excellent touchdowns through 2 weeks to save otherwise awful games.
Last week was a perfect microcosm of what Garrett Wilson's season is going to be, right? He sees 8 targets. Nice. Only 3 of those targets were deemed catchable. He catches 2 of them. One of them goes for a 68-yard touchdown, which, pays off in fantasy that week, but he's not going to do that every week. So there's going to be more games where he makes an awesome play because he's Garrett Wilson and he pays off. But there's going to be a lot of weeks where he catches 2 of those 3 catchable targets for, 35 yards and 0 touchdowns, and he totally kills you. So yeah, if you can still get top 20 wide receiver value for Wilson, I am still doing it.
I might even do it for top 30 wide receiver value. I would basically sell him for anything that's actually helpful, not just something for the sake of getting him off my roster, but anything that's actually helpful. I'm interested. Targets is always much more loosely applied when Zach Wilson is your quarterback. Speaking of quarterbacks that could stand to improve, though, Jared, we've got Deshaun Watson. Maybe there was some improvement week 2. What do we do with him going forward, though? How do we reset? Is he still somebody that you like as a starter going forward?
I think he's going to be a fringe quarterback one going forward, and that's because of the rushing ability that he has reminded us of these first 2 weeks, and because I do think Cleveland's going to lean more pass without Nick Chubb. So that stuff's going to help Deshaun Watson. But man, the passing has not looked good through 2 weeks. He did have the weather issues in week 1. He faced a good Steelers defense in week 2. I like him this week because of this matchup against Tennessee. For years now, we've been attacking the Titans pass defense because they're so good against the run, not good against the pass. I do think we'll see Cleveland go pretty pass heavy in this spot. If Watson's been your guy, I'd stick with him this week. If he doesn't produce nice fantasy numbers this week, I'll be very nervous going forward.
Yeah, I would certainly not dump him outright this week, whatever league size you're in, because if he's going to give us anything this year, it's going to be this week against Tennessee. So you don't want to dump him ahead of that. But I mean, if this were Texans, Deshaun Watson, he'd be top 3, top 4 in our QB rankings. He's instead on the QB1 fringe. So, we're saying we'll see what you got. And if he doesn't help us in fantasy this week, it'll be time to go ahead and find a replacement in some leagues, at least to find somebody else to have on your roster to start ahead of him or to platoon with him in 12-team leagues.
Yeah, agreed.
And then the Watson question brings up what to do with some of his pass catchers. So are you changing anything with Amari Cooper this week? Are you looking to sell him?
Cooper's a hold for me generally. I mean, I hate that he's already dealing with multiple injuries and it's only week 3 with his injury history. Now he did play well through the groin thing on Monday night. He didn't look limited at all. So that was nice to see. I think Elijah Moore and David Njoku are buys though. Elijah Moore has seen a 22% target share through 2 games. If he, maintains that, again, for an offense that I do think is going to pass a bit more going forward, I think Elijah Moore can still be someone that delivers for us as at least like a wide receiver 3. And then, David Njoku, it's been a, pretty disappointing start, though he was okay in week 2, but he did get up to a 90% route rate last week. And again, I think all these guys are just going to have to be leaned on more without Nick Chubb, the Browns' best offensive player, out for the season.
I agree that each of those 2 guys is a mild buy. I'm not sure that I would actually target them in individual trades, but I wouldn't mind including them as pieces of larger trades because I think there is some upside. I think the ceiling is limited unless Deshaun Watson gets a lot better going forward. But Elijah Moore actually sits 1 spot ahead of Amari Cooper in expected PPR points through 2 games. Now, that's better for Moore than it is for Cooper. That's lower than where Cooper was drafted. So
Mhm.
I don't know if those guys are going to be similar in terms of fantasy production going forward, but there's at least a chance that they are similar. So that makes more attractive and makes Cooper less attractive. David Njoku, we'll see. It's a position where we need fewer targets. We need fewer catches per week. So he's certainly set up to turn things around. There are plenty of people wondering if they need to replace David Njoku this week. Specifically, I had somebody on our Discord ask if they should trade David Njoku for Hunter Henry. Now, I'll preface this one by saying I think it was okay for this guy to make this trade because I don't think there's a wide gap between Njoku and Henry, and this team had like 4 Browns on it. So you don't want to overinvest. I think in this case, it was fine to go to Hunter Henry, but that was only one of the Njoku or Henry questions I saw. We've got that trade. We've also got a question of whether to dump David Njoku outright to pick up Hunter Henry, Hayden Hurst, Zach Ertz. So what would be your answer to those two?
I like Njoku over all those guys still, and especially this week in this Titans matchup. Njoku's another guy. If he doesn't deliver this week, then I'll be a lot more worried about him a week from now. But especially that second question, if you have guys like Henry and Hurst and Ertz all available in your league, that there's options out there, so you don't need to make a move right now this week. I would give Njoku another shot in this matchup against Tennessee.
Yes, and even if everybody in your league starts snapping up 2 tight ends apiece, they're going to be available in trade later on, and that probably means there's some wide receiver or running back value available on your waiver wire because there just shouldn't be 2 tight ends owned on every single team in most leagues. Now, if someone does dump David Njoku in your league, you can head to the free agent finder on draftsharks.com. Update your roster on there. You'll see Njoku and all the other players currently available in your league as free agents. You will be able to see who we would recommend picking up versus the guys on your roster. So the free agent finder, not only helpful for those waiver runs every week, but also still helpful for those first come, first served waivers after that, or maybe you have a second waiver run, or maybe you're just looking ahead beyond this week. You can check it all out in the free agent finder with any team that you have synced on draftsharks.com. Jared, let's wrap things up with streaming defenses. We'll start with week 3. And I mean, I think everybody likes the Chiefs this week for the matchup against the Bears, but they're probably owned in your league, 81% rostered on Yahoo. So who else do you like for a week 3 defense?
Yeah, Cleveland, who we have talked about a few times here, they've been a good real life defense through 2 weeks. Now it hasn't led to many fantasy points yet, but I think it's going to start to, and it could this week against Tennessee, who, it's a bad offensive line in Tennessee. You have to hope the Browns jump out to a lead and force Tannehill to drop back and not just, hand it off to Derrick Henry. But if that happens, I think the Browns defense could have a nice game. And then my second target would be Jacksonville against Houston. We've talked about Houston, another really beat up offensive line. It's better when it's healthy, but they have a ton of injuries on the O-line. They have been throwing it a lot, which is what we want from our defenses. And I was going through some cornerback stuff for my matchups article this morning, and all 3 of Jacksonville's starting corners have played really well so far this season, which definitely helps the case for that defense.
Yeah, they have 3 takeaways in each of their 2 games so far. Number 8 in overall defensive DVOA. So I agree with Jacksonville. I agree with Cleveland. Looking ahead to week 4, I like the Broncos, who were probably dropped in your league and many others after a crappy week 2 against Washington that likely cost you fantasy points. If you started the Broncos, they had week 1 against the Raiders, and they're at Miami this week. So even if they haven't been dropped yet, there is still time for them to be dropped, and they probably should be dropped. But week 4, Denver is at the Bears, so they get that Justin Fields matchup that has been giving. Then they're against the Jets in week 5. So if you're looking ahead, if you're trying to get that streamer a week ahead, maybe you have Jacksonville this week, you don't want to play them in week 4. I like grabbing Denver for the following 2 weeks.
Yeah, totally. And I like Denver next week and not much else as far as streamer level defenses go. So this is a case where I would be willing to just hold 2 defenses for, the next 4 days. Whoever, whether you're using Cleveland or Jacksonville this week, grab them and Denver. You can drop Cleveland or Jacksonville and use Denver for the following 2 weeks. I think it's worth it to me, Chicago and the Jets are the 2 best matchups for defenses right now. So it's worth it.
Yeah, I think if your roster is deep enough, if you have more than 15, maybe 16 spots, it often can make sense to stash that second defense over some bottom of the roster wide receiver that's probably not helping you, because the reason you're keeping those 2 defenses is you're planning to use them the next 2 weeks. Now, don't just stash a defense because you want to have a second in waiting, But if you're looking at those matchups, you're trying to play ahead, I think it's a bit underrated, the value of carrying that second one for that next week. So you're not competing with other people for streaming defenses on waivers. You can find those options and more streaming options in our weekly rankings on draftsharks.com. We not only have rankings for the current week there, which you can find anywhere, we also post them a week ahead in case you want to get that week 4 streamer before the rest of your league is looking at it. And of course, we've got up-to-date rest of season and dynasty rankings as well. If you're not a DS insider yet, it's never too late to take advantage of our industry-leading content and tools. We are always here to help you win.